It's so easy to get burnt out on video games, especially when you're spending each day playing them, thinking about them, and writing about them. It was earlier this year, and I was feeling burnt out after trying a couple recent AAA titles that did nothing for me. It got me thinking about the past and whether games used to be better, or if it was just because I was younger, I had more free time, and everything was more magical. I also started thinking about how many gaps were in my gaming history, and how it might be a fun project to start filling them in. Since the idea of this seemed daunting, and I didn't want to do it unless I could make a video out of it, after some consideration, I thought about starting a project on the Atari 2600. It was the first console I ever played in the late 80s. My best friend down the road, Ryan, had one. I remember spending hours with him, playing Combat, Pitfall, and Smurf, Rescue in Gargamel's Castle. Yes, that's the title, Smurf. Eventually, he and I would both get Nintendo Entertainment Systems and move on, but those memories stayed. I would add new ones too, spending New Year's Eve in a basement with another friend named Ryan playing Atari basketball. And then when I had a Dreamcast, downloading discs full of emulated console games and discovering the joy of Tron Deadly Discs. The point being that I've enjoyed what the Atari 2600 has had to offer in the past, and so I was looking forward to revisiting it and discovering what I missed. So here's how I approach this. Wikipedia has these pages called X Year in Video Gaming, where you can look at the hardware advancements, the critically acclaimed games, and the software releases of any particular year. I knew that for any console project I would have to start with the launch titles, so that's where we'll begin. After that, I added any game mentioned on those Wikipedia pages until there were no new Atari 2600 releases. That was in 1989 with the release of Swordquest, which will be the final game I cover. I have played and written about 43 2600 games for this video, by no means an extensive list, but it covers most of the famous games on the platform, and some of the infamous ones. I feel like I got a good idea of the console and what magic the developers could create for it through this project. Feel free to watch everything in order or use the chapters to hear my thoughts on specific games. If you're interested in ranking and lists, I attempted that in this video, firstly with the launch titles, and then with everything else I played. Finally, on a technical note, I played these games in the Stella emulator through RetroArch, making use of its CRT filters to try and approximate how these games would have looked at the time. There is no raw pixel data here, folks. I appreciate you too much to subject you to that. So, without further ado, let's start exploring the Atari 2600 library. I almost gave up before I started. I just couldn't understand the control scheme of the 2600. I was about to write about how the first game on the list was indecipherable, and then I steadied my hand. I had a closer look at the controls, learned that the start button is needed to actually start the game, who'd have thunk it, how the select button selects different game modes, and you know what? Air-Sea Battle is pretty damn cool. It has a host of different game modes, and the majority of them are two-player. It's a competition. Who can score the most points? Whether it's turrets on the ground, ships in the sea, or planes overhead, the point is to aim, shoot, and score. Some modes allow the player to move the turret's gun. Others allow the player to move the turret. The ship and planes move of their own accord, but they can be slowed or sped up to acquire the desired angle, and in some game modes, fire is automatic. The last set of game modes are player versus player, ship versus plane. Returning to my memories of playing Combat on the Atari 2600 with my friend Ryan, we would set a different game mode each time, and in my youthful imagination, it meant that the scenarios and possibility for play were endless. Air-Sea Battle has a similar feel.
It looks and sounds simplistic, but the potential is there for limitless play. The reality is different, but part of what I'm looking for in revisiting these old games is to rekindle a childlike sense of wonder in the medium. To reconnect to those days when video games could do or be anything, and each new experience was to be cherished. Air-Sea Battle is successful in creating this illusion, and thus was a wonderful introduction to the experiences that the Atari 2600 can provide. The different game modes of Air-Sea Battle served me well when approaching basic math. I thought, is this it? Simple addition? No! There's simple subtraction, multiplication, and division as well. I also wasn't expecting having to put in the remainder on the division problems. There's a nice rising tune as I cycle through the numbers, and a little fanfare when I got the answer right. The question I have is, who is this for? A basic math program that would cost retail price. I guess this is the start of the edutainment craze in computer gaming. Hey, it does what it says on the box. It's basic math. And we go from edutainment to gambling. I wondered when I booted up the game if it was going to be the card game or something else. It was the card game. I only needed a few minutes of footage for what I was going to write about, but I ended up playing longer. Hey, Blackjack endures for a reason. I wouldn't call it fun, but the game is compelling. I played until I got the titular Blackjack. I thought the layout odd. I wonder if it's 2 players and that's why there's so much empty space. I didn't play around with the game settings this time because I was so caught up in playing Blackjack. Oh, and here's a final oddity. I have the left analog stick turned on because I remember the Atari controller being a joystick with a button. But so far I've been able to use the D-pad to control things as well. Not so with Blackjack. I had to use the analog stick to select whether to hit, stay, or double. Bizarre. And now we come to one of the games I recall playing endlessly with my friend Ryan as a kid, Combat. Like Air-Sea Battle, the combat scenario seemed limitless. How every time we turned the game on, we were presented with a new way to play. It turns out there are 27 game modes, but I imagine the palette swaps did a lot to convince me there were more. The thing is, I can see hours being spent on any of these modes. Sure, it's simplistic, but it's also pure. It's one-on-one multiplayer, each side armed with the same abilities. Well, okay, there are special cases, and we'll get to those. Fighting to be the first to reach 7 points. I can imagine a best 2 out of 3 scenario between friends, and when that's over, a let's go again. The modes are clever variations. Back when I thought the game was just tanks, I marveled at the different level layouts. With how difficult it is to smoothly control the tank, each new obstacle presents additional challenge. But then things get cool. Ricocheting bullets are introduced, and in some modes they bounce further than others. The ricochet is accompanied by rising notes to add to the joy of the bullet whizzing around. Then things get weird. A mode where only a ricochet can kill the opposing tank. I wondered why my bullet shot the length of the screen, but then went through my opponent. Once the barriers get introduced and the ricochets are pinging all over the place, one imagines winning is more a test of luck than skill. And that's why the final mode for the tanks is the invisible mode. The tanks only show themselves when they fire. This is frustrating not only because the player is unsure of where their opponent is, but they're also unsure of where they are, and firing to find out gives away their position. And then the planes appear. I loved this mode, if just that the player can fly off one side of the screen and appear on the other, as well as hide in the clouds. Then if that wasn't enough, suddenly there's 2 versus 2 planes, and then a giant plane versus 3 planes. I didn't find the variations in the plane section as robust as the variations in the tank section. but that's because I found the base concept of playing combat more exciting. Now the caveat to this whole piece of writing is that combat is a multiplayer only game and I spent my time with it in single player. I wasn't able to parse whether or not the game was too simplistic or how frustrating it might actually be to try and survive when being pelted with enemy fire in most of these scenarios. It could be that the mechanics don't allow for limitless play because the play offered is not as engaging as it could be. I can't tell you these things. All I speak of is the potential of the game as I saw it, moving around, shooting, and trying out all the game modes. On that alone, combat more than delivers. I originally thought Indy 500 was a two-player game as well. I raced the first race to get footage and then decided to test out the game mode options. They're single player. In two-player, I played until I got 20 laps and it didn't stop. So I wonder if players just keep racing until they get bored. In single, you get a minute on the clock and you have to complete as many laps as you can within that time. As I flick through the game modes, for some reason it makes me think about changing channels on an old CRT television, I found more treasure than just new racetracks. There's a Get the Ball mode, where players keep trying to collect a new ball as it appears, being able to dive through gaps in the track and wrap around to the other side of the screen. Finally, there's Ice mode, or at least that's what came to mind. The track was tinged light blue, which made me think of ice, and then it was confirmed when I started racing. The car kept spinning out of control on me, and this is a great segue to talk about how the car controls. Over the years, as the concept of game feel has become more common, certain words are used to describe abstract ideas of how tight or loose the controls of a game are. Indy 500 is a contradiction. Its driving is stiff, but it's also floaty. It feels like it's all too easy for the car to get away from me while I'm driving. I'll be doing fine, making small adjustments, working my way around corners, and then I'll adjust a little too much, overcompensate, and either hit the wall or spin out. Luckily, there are no crashes in this game. Hitting the wall or the other player will just remove all acceleration. I say just like that's not a huge time sink. The problem with the walls, though, is one of collision. The player can get stuck there, taking precious seconds driving out of the wall at a snail's pace, and then having to get back to full speed. Bad driving is punished quite severely here. What I appreciated about the ice levels is that the increased spin whilst turning taught me how to effectively drift by taking my finger off the acceleration and letting momentum take me around the corner. I guess this early racing game does have some nuance in mastering its tracks. Thank goodness for the wealth of information available online. I almost tore what little hair I have left trying to get the game's controls to work. I could press start, but my ship wouldn't move, and I would just crash into spaceships and asteroids, accompanied by a sickening sound. So here's where I went wrong. The second controller is what controls this game. I don't know why, but that's the way it works. I set up the second controller onto my keyboard, using the arrows and Z key, like I was playing NES emulation in the late 90s, and I was able to play what Starship has to offer. Enjoyment is another matter entirely. I love the ambient sounds in this game. I think it's meant to emulate the controls of the ship. It's a fun amount of bleeps and bloops that lends a science fiction aura to flying around the blackness. The goal is simple. Accumulate as many points as possible in about 2 minutes. Line up enemy ships in your sights and press the fire button to obliterate them, while avoiding slamming into the asteroids. A number of modes make the game faster and harder. There's a 2-player mode where one player has to keep out of the sights of the ship. There's a version without enemies where you just have to avoid hitting anything. And then there's the Lunar Lander game. I love Lunar Lander. It's one of the first PC games I had back in the mid-80s. I was curious as to how it would be translated on the Atari. It isn't! In this game mode, you just have to pilot the landing craft towards the moon, and if you're touching it, press the jet button and you get a point. You can fly right through the moon, press the button, and get a point. Asteroids are introduced and must be avoided, but that's it. It was disappointing. That's my whole vibe approaching this game. I guess I was expecting something more? Whether that's more exciting, more complex, or just more interesting, I don't know. But I found Starship ultimately too bland to enjoy my time with it. This was another game where I had little idea of what I was doing, and then gained a greater understanding of how to play the game by searching online. Thanks, Strategy Wiki! Now, I could just find the manuals and read them before playing such games, but I think part of the fun of approaching these older games is in discovery. Can I work out how to play them just by tinkering around? If not, I can always read up after giving it a shot. Upon first play, I thought Street Racer was an even more simplistic racing game than Indy 500. Move left and right and avoid the racers. In a way, this is true, but when it comes to game modes, there might be more at work here. First off, this is a multiplayer-only game. Player 1 on the right is always racing at least one other player on the left. What's cool about that is switching through the game modes shows that the game offers 3 and 4 player modes if there are enough people and controllers available. What I learned only after reading the wiki is that each mode holds the possibility of constant acceleration, but only if your reflexes are honed. Holding down the button will start accelerating the car. It moves faster and faster until you crash or take your foot off the gas, in which case the car will start to decelerate. I love this because it means that each player can find a sweet spot with the speed they're comfortable at and toe that line through careful manipulation of the controls. Now, game modes. The first is the titular street racing. I thought the next section was motorbikes, but it's actually slalom, with skis. I guess the white should have given that away. Instead of avoiding cars, the player is trying to fit through the hole. Next is called dodge 'em. Pretty self-explanatory. Hold the accelerator and try to drive off the top of the screen while avoiding the giant pong ball of death. Doing so nets you 1 point. Now do it again. As an aside, each of these games lasts for 2 minutes and 16 seconds, as was the case with many of the previous games. Looking into it, the answer has to do with the math of 64 frames a second, as problems with interlacing didn't allow an even 60. But also, the programmers decided about 2 minutes was a good amount of time to keep a player's attention. Doubling that would have made the rounds too long. After dodge 'em, we have jet shooter. The button shoots now. This mode is intense because with the speed that the planes are dropping, it feels like the player has milliseconds to line up and shoot the plane before it crashes into them. Number Cruncher is a game where you have to speedily hit numbers head-on to increase your score. And finally, there's Scoop Ball. A game of dongle A goes into socket B. Wait for the ball to appear, scoop it up, then wait for the strange object that has an opening for the ball on its underside. Deposit ball in slot, gain a point. Ultimately, I wasn't enjoying any of the modes of Street Racer as much as most of the other launch titles. I appreciate the variety of game modes and the ability to play against 3 other friends in each of them, but I'd probably go back and play Starship before this one. I could say that it's because it's multiplayer only, but as of writing this paragraph, my favorite 2600 game is Combat, so that's not a valid excuse. On to the next one. Surround is 2-player Snake. Don't hit your tail or your opponents. I thought this might be another multiplayer only game, but that's just the intended play. Every second game mode has the second player versus the computer. Aside from different colors, the modes are pretty much all the same. Sometimes the snake shifts direction on its own, sometimes the snake speeds up, and finally, there seemed to be what was a free paint mode. I could appreciate this if not for the accompanying harsh sound effects of the rising tension, followed by the sickening crash. Starship was the same. I find myself unable to handle the harsher sounds of the Atari 2600 soundboard. This is in the running for the least impressive launch title I've played so far. Video Olympics is the last of the launch games, and one I was looking forward to. Atari built its name on Pong, and of course you couldn't sell the Atari console without Pong being a part of it. But my guess is that since it had been a few years since Pong was released, which had dozens of its own home console versions, they felt they couldn't just port the game and leave it at that. Video Olympics is chock full of game modes, 50 to be exact. Some of these modes require 4 players, most require 2, and there's a couple single player modes, which is what I spent the most time with. I'll be discussing them, but first I need to talk about the controls. One of the dangers of emulation is that due to all the unique controllers and control schemes, unless you're playing with the original console controller on the original console on a television of the time, you won't be getting the full experience. I wondered if my difficulty controlling the paddle was because I'm playing with a modern Xbox controller. The paddle is fussy. The analog stick is emulating the paddle controller, which is a wheel the player turns with a button on the side. My guess is the paddle controller offers a lot more nuance than what I was able to muster with this analog stick, although near the end of my time with the game, I had a lot more finesse with it. It requires a feathered touch because the sensitivity is so high, any sudden action taking it all the way to its extremes. I understand the thought behind this. When the game starts, often the player doesn't need to move much to get to the ball, but when the ball starts speeding up, or if it hits your opponent's paddle at a sharp angle, you need to move across the field in milliseconds. I'm thinking that if this is how Pong actually controls, I understand its longevity. The more one plays, the more one feels comfortable with the nuances of how the game works. It's a game where one can gain expertise and the satisfaction that goes along with it, a concept that is still overwhelmingly with us in the medium. Now onto the game modes. I wondered why there seemed to be 2 identical versions of each game mode. One mode is called Speed, the other Whammy. Speed mode makes the ball faster each time it hits a paddle, while Whammy mode allows the player to hit the whammy button when the ball hits the paddle, to send it careening off at an odd angle. There were times when the ball would be stuck traveling completely horizontally between 2 paddles. The whammy button is the solution to that problem, as well as adding a little spice to the game. Some game modes have a catch variation as well that allows the player to hold the ball onto the paddle. Aside from their variations, there are 8 different games in Video Olympics. The first is Standard Pong. Game modes 1 and 2 are one of the 2 single-player modes available. Next is Soccer. The screen is surrounded by a barrier with small goals on either side. The player's paddle acts as goalie. Next we have Foosball, or Foos-Pong as the game calls it. Same table, but the paddles are smaller, lined in a row, and are all controlled at once. The table changes once again, and this time to hockey, like soccer, but smaller goals. The first game modes of hockey have 1 paddle. I used it as a training mode to get used to the nuances of the controls. Quadra-Pong is up next, the only mandatory 4-player mode, with each player guarding one side of the screen and the game being 2v2. The next modes are when things get weird. Volleyball flips the game on its side with a net in the middle. The ball cannot hit the floor on your side. The button will jump you up to the top of the net to be able to block spikes, and basketball is similar, having to hit the top sides of the basket. I found it difficult to get the ball angled in such a way to make a basket, but there are jump modes in the game similar to volleyball. Being able to bounce the ball closer to the basket certainly makes things easier. Video Olympics is certainly the most feature-rich of all the launch titles. They took Pong, which is still fun to play after all these years, and transferred the idea to facsimiles of similar sports. Some modes are better than others, but nothing feels half-assed. It's a testament to Pong that this collection of games based off it more than holds its own among all the other launch titles. As I've been playing these games, for my own amusement, I've been creating a personal ranked list. Which games did I enjoy the most, and which did I enjoy the least? Now that we're done with the launch titles, I thought it might be fun to share that list with you. We'll do this again at the end of the video once I've played everything. At number 9, we have Basic Math. At number 8, Surround. At number 7, Blackjack. Number 6, Street Racer. Coming in at number 5 in the exact middle of the pack, Starship. At number 4, we have Air Sea Battle. At number 3, Indy 500. Number 2, Video Olympics. And in the top spot of the launch titles, at number 1, we have Combat. As we go forward, I'll be ranking each new game against these titles. Now it's time to check out some more of the prominent games of the Atari 2600. In Video Olympics, I lamented the lack of more single-player modes. For all intents and purposes, Breakout is the answer to the question, but what if Pong was single-player? There are bricks. The ball returns after smashing into them. Use the paddle to keep the ball in the air and see if you can clear the room. It's really hard. The reason is that the different colored bricks represent different speeds. The ball is easy to manage when you're dealing with the blue or green layers, but once you get to yellow, and especially orange and red, things start speeding up. Luckily, the paddle is easier to control than it was in Video Olympics, but that makes little difference when the ball's coming in angled sharply at 100 kph. I exaggerate, but that's what it feels like. There is a bit of leeway. Many times I felt that the game registered the ball hitting my paddle not because I got there in time, but because I was in the general area. But it feels fair because at those speeds and with those angles, you need all the help you can get. And some of the game modes seem like they're there to help. Variations are stacked on each other in Breakout. There are 3 main game modes. Each of these game modes has 4 variations, with each variation adjusting the difficulty. We'll work our way down. The final game mode is called Breakthrough. It seems like it'd be the easiest mode and the most fun. Instead of the ball bouncing back when it hits a brick, it keeps going, only rebounding when it hits a wall. You'd think this would be great, and it is a lot of fun to see the points rack up and to hear the ascending notes as your ball plows through the bricks like they were bowling pins. But what this means is the ball hits the orange and red rows on the first bounce, and you need to be ready for a fastball coming at you. Mixed sports metaphors. There's also a time mode, and I had no interest in that. The variations likewise sound useful until one tries to use them. There's the steerable variation, where controlling the paddle also floats the ball in the same direction, giving the player a little more control over where it might land. This sounds good in theory, but being tied to the paddle control meant I was always over or under correcting. But it feels like it could be fun once a player becomes accustomed to it. Catch mode is the ability to hold the button to catch the ball on the paddle. This is good if you want a breather and would like to shoot the ball off from a different location, but seeing the ball keeps the acceleration it came in with, I didn't find the variation useful. Finally, there's invisible mode. The bricks are invisible until the ball hits one. This feels like a mode for those who think the base game is too easy. And I want to touch on difficulty as I wrap up talking about Breakout. While researching my master's degree, I was made aware of a book called Pilgrim in the Microworld by David Sudnow. It was published in 1979 and is an early example of games criticism. Sudnow finds himself addicted to Breakout. The book is a beautiful exploration of early video gaming related to Sudnow's own background in music. You can see an early example of language forming to attempt to communicate what it feels like to play the game. Unfortunately, the book is also a descent into his madness as he keeps trying to master Breakout. After spending a short amount of time with the game, I understand this. It seems so simple. Just break all the bricks. But then contending with the speed, the angles, how the paddle works, this all requires dedication that most would not be willing to give. I think Breakout is an amazing game, and this is an amazing port. I highly recommend giving it a try, but I for one am happy to leave things at just a try. As a fan of adventure games, I'd always heard about adventure, but I never had any compulsion to go back and play it. This project allowed me an opportunity, and I'm glad I took it. Everything is at its most rudimentary, yes, but the core of adventure games is there, mainly inventory puzzles and exploration. The fantasy setting helps too, what with castles, dragons, and treasure, but then things get weird. There were 2 items that seemed to be there just for fun. Before the room housing the treasure, there was a magnet. Taking it into the treasure room caused the trophy to follow me. I thought it was an enemy and rushed out of the room, only realizing my mistake once I put the magnet down. Secondly I think it's a bridge. It's there in the maze and is used to pass through the walls. I guess it's a tunnel? Anyways, it can be picked up as well, although in Game 1 I didn't see any reason for its use. My guess is it's more important in Games 2 and 3, and the developer wanted to introduce all the elements of his game in its easiest mode. I completed Game 1 rather speedily. I felt compelled to. I wanted to discover what each new room contained, and the optimal way to get through them. It's a short enough game that it afforded me this compulsion. I do have to wonder if I found it so easy because I have not only played a lot of adventure games, but games in general. I've worked my way through mazes, and if I find a locked door, I go and search for a key. Heck, if there were enemies guarding keys and odd items, this feels like the prototype for a Zelda dungeon. I had a brief go of Games 2 and 3. Game 2's maze is in the dark, and the sword is being held by a bat that the player needs to snatch the weapon away from. And my brief attempt of Game 3 had the dragons rushing me immediately, with the sword-holding bat flying in at a diagonal this time. I'll stick with the laid-back nature of Game 1, thank you. Part of the joy of all the games I've played so far has to do with exploration. In all the other games, that exploration is mechanical. How does the game work? What did the controls do? What are the different game modes? Adventure is the first game where the exploration is part of the game itself. What lies in each new screen? How can I get past this obstacle? What new wonders lie in store? It's for this reason that I enjoyed playing adventure so much. Missile command is harrowing. A sense of futility envelops the player once their cities start falling. Like all we're doing is delaying the inevitable. As I write this, Russia has invaded Ukraine. Man, this video has taken time to come out. And already I've heard threats of using the nuclear option, so it's either the right time to be playing a game about nuclear annihilation, or the wrong time. As much as I would like to just talk about how the game plays, it's impossible for me to remove missile command, not only from the climate it was made in, but the current view of war and destruction. So, now let's talk about how the game plays. Overwhelming is the right word. On the first difficulty, it starts off easy enough. The player can fire 3 bombs at a time to obliterate the missiles heading towards all the cities. The missiles are moving slowly, and it didn't take me too long to learn to ignore the smoke trail and lead the missile itself, so it would fly into my explosion. It's a great feeling being able to time a shot to take out multiple missiles at the same time, or even a smart bomb. Incidentally, I tried a higher difficulty, and those smart bombs will jump up and hover over your timed explosions. Jerks. Each level gets a little faster and a little tougher. First, one city falls, and then another. Maybe you've earned enough points to rebuild at least one city, but soon more fall. The missiles keep coming. They're getting faster. There's more smart bombs. Why not just give up? No, you must hold on for as long as possible. Eventually, it's too late. All the cities have fallen, and there's nothing left to do but give in as the last missile heads for your turret. You have failed. Everything is destroyed. And that's Missile Command! It's smooth to play, it starts off fun to play, but what the game is and what it means kept gnawing at the back of my brain as things became more difficult. I find it impossible to ignore what this game is actually about as I fail at it. I think that was the intention, and for an early arcade game of all things to evoke such a reaction makes Missile Command something special indeed. Terrifying, but special. According to Wikipedia, all great video essays start this way. Space Invaders was the killer app for the 2600, the must-have game. I'll say this, looking at the absolutely staggering amount of game modes alone, I think there's merit in that. I mean, Space Invaders itself is kinda basic. Oh, no more basic than Breakout or Missile Command, but after a couple of games of the normal mode, I had no compulsion to play more. It must have been different at the time. If you're watching game criticism on YouTube, you should be familiar with the fervor behind Space Invaders, how it took the world by storm. There's a myth that it was responsible for a shortage of the 100 yen coin in Japan. I'm not so enamored by Space Invaders as I am by Missile Command or even Breakout, but I can understand the desire to best the game. Space Invaders, like life, comes at you fast. The invaders don't start that far away from your shields, and they're always creeping closer. They're firing at you, and every time you kill one, the rest get a little faster. If they shoot you, you have more lives to try again, but if they reach Earth, it's game over. Space Invaders is ruthless. I must have gotten lucky my first game because I was able to get past a couple of screens. After this attempt, I wasn't able to get past the first screen again. I did try a couple of the alternate modes, one where the shields move and the weapons from the invaders zigzag. There's also a mode where they're invisible and they shoot faster. As if the game wasn't tough enough, there are plenty of options to make it tougher. The rest of the 112 modes, you heard that right, is all of the difficulty options of single player applied to a series of different cooperative and competitive two-player modes. When it comes to the arcade classics, I just don't enjoy Space Invaders as much as other games. It could be the anxiety of the game speeding up with every small victory, the insectoid appearance of the invaders, or it's because the game feels so frivolous. It's a good port, and if you haven't played Space Invaders, I think you owe it to yourself to give it a play, as it's an important part of game history. But it's not a game I look back at fondly. Dragster is a simple drag racing game. Two players race to see who can get to the end of the screen first. The only thing I found of interest in this game is that to shift gears, the player pushes the joystick to the left and letting it snap back to center shifts the gear up. Maybe it's fun with another player, but this is the worst game I've played so far. Yes, even worse than basic math. Not a good start for Activision as a third-party developer. At least Fishing Derby is pleasant. It's a fishing challenge. Hook the fish by dangling your line in front of its nose and pull it up without it getting eaten by the shark. Fish at the bottom are worth more points. I love how the fishermen look and how cartoonishly long the rod can stretch when trying to avoid the shark. There's not much to this game, but it was fun enough to play. The manual said that both this and Dragster were designed by David Crane, who was challenging himself by making games out of ideas that others said were impossible to turn into games. I already like Fishing Derby a lot more than Dragster, and seeing where this ethos leads will be fun moving forward. I like the solutions developers thought of to represent and animate the human form on the Atari 2600.
For boxing, showing the boxers from above is a stroke of genius. The game itself, well, it's fun enough. Use the gloves to block incoming hits and try to wail on your opponent's face. The computer is relentless in pursuing the player, and in what seemed like a bout of unfairness, it would often pop off multiple scored hits in a row, like it was executing a fighting game combo. I'm sure there's nuance to the push and pull of this pixelated pugilistic performance, but personally, I played all I needed to after a single round. A preview! Asteroids feels like the weakest of Atari's arcade ports so far, which is disappointing because they've often been the highlight. Maybe it's my nostalgia talking, or because I haven't played the arcade version of Asteroids for so long that I'm misremembering how it played, but this version just didn't stack up. First off, the colored asteroids make the whole thing look silly, like I'm in the Clown Nebula, blowing apart giant balls of confetti. I also remembered the asteroids breaking apart in all directions when shot, which was what made the game so nail-biting. Death could be flying at you from any angle. When these asteroids are shot, they do break apart, but they stick to the paths they're already traveling. It makes it feel like all the asteroids are on tracks instead of flying through the stars every which way. I do like the tension of the music speeding up and how it reminds me of the Jaws theme. There's also plenty of game variations: asteroid speed, how many points it takes to get a life, 2-player modes, and a special button. In some games, pressing down on the controller will make the ship warp to a different part of the screen. In some games, pressing down on the controller will put up a shield, allowing the asteroid to pass through you. In some games, pressing down on the controller will flip the ship 180 degrees, and in some games it will do nothing at all. There's also child mode, which makes the game a lot easier. What most of these special modes are hoping to help with is that when spawning in after a death, or when a new level starts, often there is not enough time to react before being plastered by an asteroid. Because the ship and the asteroids can fly off the screen and come in on the other side, a game over can come from anywhere. The best mode for this uncertainty is the shield. Periodically putting it on when unsure can save a lot of hassle. Just don't leave it on for more than 2 seconds or your ship will blow up. Also, the warp drive exacerbates the problem it's trying to solve. By warping the player elsewhere on the screen, they might not have the time to react before an asteroid is right up in their business. I remember enjoying Asteroids, the vector look of the game, how difficult it was to deal with acceleration in space, the unpredictability of breaking apart the asteroids, and keeping a vigil on threats coming in from all directions. Again, this may be my nostalgia talking, but this version of the game just doesn't hold up to what I remember Asteroids being. It's far from terrible, but I can't recommend it either. Might this be the first survival horror game? Haunted House took me a while to get the hang of. I had to read the manual, and even then I had to have a couple of revelations. I was about to lambaste the game for separating its rooms by doors that open onto the same area the player entered, and how disorientating that was. And then I realized they're staircases. They're taking me to another floor of the house. It's because Game Mode 1 doesn't have doors separating the rooms. Game 2 does, and that's when it clicked. But I'm getting ahead of myself. There are 3 pieces of an urn that the player has to assemble before they can escape the haunted mansion. The first game has 4 floors. The pieces are randomly scattered, and since it's dark, the player needs to use matches to find them. Using matches lowers your score, and in other game modes, lightning will temporarily light the room. There are also monsters trying to scare you out of your wits. Bats, tarantulas, and the ghost of the mansion's previous owner. The player has more than a few lives, but if the scepter is found, then the monsters will leave the player alone. Unfortunately, the player can only hold 1 item at a time, so understanding the layout of the mansion is crucial. I loved this.
From the player character being a pair of scared eyes, to the ambient noise of their heart beating, to how disorientating I found the mansion until things started to click. I'm realizing that while gameplay-focused experiences can be fun, so far I am drawn to the games with the most narrative context, rudimentary as it might be at this point in time. There's even backstory in the manual. And we arrive at one of the most infamous games of the Atari 2600, a game partly responsible for the video game crash of 1983, and I'll be playing E.T. soon enough, don't you worry. I've never played this port before, and I gotta say, my bias against it is still its biggest problem. You take one look at this game and you say, that's not Pac-Man, that looks awful. Here's a short reminder of what the arcade version of Pac-Man looks like. Now back to the Atari version. Ew, see what I mean? Of course, being a game, the important question is, does it play like Pac-Man? It does. Actually, it's really fun to play, and that's because Pac-Man is still really fun to play. Oh, there are issues, and I'm about to get into them, but I had to pull myself away from recording after a couple games to write this, and that tells me that the core of what makes Pac-Man a great game is alive in this port. So, here's my problems with it, and just like Asteroids, this may be my memory playing tricks on me rather than it being a reflection of the original game. First off, Pac-Man is stiff to control. Rather than making a quick escape from a ghost by changing direction and going down a new path, that particular tension and elation being a high point of playing Pac-Man, the way Pac-Man controls here, I felt it was best to stay away from the ghosts altogether, or overly rely on the power pellets. I also think the way the maze feels squashed adds to this issue. Years ago, I read the book Racing the Beam by Ian Bogost and Nick Montfort, a deep dive into the creation of a selection of Atari 2600 games. And one of the things I remember from that book is that the 2600 didn't have the memory to draw pixels. It drew its graphics in the CRT lines of the television. That's why everything on the Atari 2600 looks rectangular. I think that's why Pac-Man isn't afforded smooth movement through the maze, and why it feels unfair when a ghost clips the corner of the character. One final note is that the game modes are all to do with difficulty. It either speeds up or slows down the player or the ghosts. Game 3 is recommended for children, as Pac-Man is normal speed, but the ghosts are in slow motion. I loved this mode so much. I laughed as I was able to skate around the maze, collecting all the pellets, thinking of the ghosts as an afterthought, until I got greedy and one clipped me. More than anything, it was this experience devoid of challenge that confirmed that the act of playing Pac-Man, even when it looks like this, is still a great time. For a game called Pitfall, I sure did fall down a lot of pits. That wasn't nearly as clever as it sounded in my head. Anyways, Pitfall is a game I remember playing a lot of as a child, jumping on crockheads, searching for treasure, and the Tarzan music every time Harry grabs a vine. My experience all these years later was not as enjoyable. I wasn't having much fun at all wandering the jungle maze and performing the same jumps over and over and over again. It got me thinking about how certain classic games are still enjoyable to play, while others are quickly made obsolete by improvements to the genre. Pitfall came out in 1982. Super Mario Bros. Came out in 1985. Since then, there have been a gluttony of great platforming games up to the modern day. The thing is, even after playing the modern classics, I can go back and have fun playing Super Mario Bros. I did not have fun going back and playing Pitfall. It's still worthwhile to look at the game in its context though. The game world is 256 screens long, and it loops. The manual suggests that if you want an easier time, head to the left instead of the right, as when Harry dies, he respawns on the left of the screen, and the barrels always roll in that same direction. There's a timer of 20 minutes to grab all 32 treasures, so there's obviously an optimal path through the game. The manual also suggests mapping out the jungle, and while it can be cumbersome, I love the idea of people drawing their own maps to navigate game spaces. So, in the end, I appreciate Pitfall as an early platformer. I appreciate its focus on exploration and just how big a game it is considering the constraints of the console it was made for. Playing it, however, is a different matter. I found the screens too similar, the obstacles too annoying, and the reward of finding treasure unsubstantial. I am, however, curious about Pitfall 2, which is coming up a little later. H.E.R.'s Revenge is amazing. The multicolored neutral zone, accompanied by a droning hum, is striking. The ever-present threat of the homing missile always tracking my location keeps the game tense. And then the cannon I'm trying to destroy turns into a ninja star and fires itself at me? Get out of here! Once its shield is gone, I can summon a laser shot of my own to destroy it, but I have to get the timing right. The next level has the shield's ripple, and each level the homing missile gets faster. Yes, the neutral zone will disable it, but it disables my fire as well, and then enough levels into the game, there is no neutral zone anymore. Most importantly, H.E.R.'s Revenge is just fun to play. The difficulty ramps up at a leisurely pace, and the game is simple enough to understand after one level, but it never became boring. It controls well, it looks and sounds great, and it plays well. A triple threat! Plus, it has difficulty options and a 2-player mode. For years, I've heard people sing the praises of H.E.R.'s Revenge as one of the standout titles of the entire Atari 2600 library, and now I know why. Growing up with the NES, I'm used to the idea of a story being told in the game's manual rather than in the game itself. I was not expecting a game to tell its story in an accompanying comic book. Not only that, but the game has a hint system relating to specific words on specific pages in said comic book. As I spent my time with Swordquest Earthworld before looking at the manual and reading the comic, I got a decent idea of how to play it. But it was the context given after the comic was read that made me look back on my time with the game fondly. Like Adventure, Earthworld is an early adventure game. The hero travels through rooms of the Zodiac, searching for a sword. The sword from the title screen. It's a quest for this sword. A sword quest, if you will. The main characters of the comic have to travel through 4 worlds to achieve their goal, and Earthworld is the first of a planned quadrilogy. They never got to make the 4th game. Certain rooms of the Zodiac contain trials, feats of action gameplay that the player has to overcome. Some of these feats can be made easier with items found in other rooms, and just mapping out the world and finding access to the rooms is part of the game. I was able to overcome one of these challenges because I had an item to help me, and it might have been the easiest one. All of the challenges are non-violent. This is due to the larger lesson our heroes learn in the comic book, and failure will send the player back to the start of the challenge. Seeing how frustrating I found most of these challenges, I'm glad there's no live system. Other than that, there's a cool transition between rooms, a nice use of color, and the sword adds tension during the challenges, especially the one where you have to walk through the rainbow passages. Playing Earthworld without context gives me the impression of an ambitious adventure game that requires dedication to understand its rules, let alone uncover its secrets. Reading the manual and the comic book adds context, and suddenly the dedication is replaced by perseverance to brave all the Zodiac rooms and to overcome their challenges to acquire the sword and take your revenge. It's amazing what a little context can add to a video game. The joke I've heard about E.T. is that you spend all your time falling into pits and then escaping from pits. That's accurate. When I was playing the game blind, I thought that there were things I didn't understand about how the game worked. This is true. A manual read later, and choosing the game mode that removes the scientist and government agent turns the game into one of exploration. But I still found myself falling into pits. Often I'd rise out of a pit, only to fall in it again. That happened a lot. The Atari controller only has one button, and this might be the first example of context-sensitive controls. Based on the icon at the top of the screen, pressing the button will make E.T. fly, call Elliot, or warp to a new screen. All of this takes energy, however, and I found my energy reserves depleting rather quickly relying on these alien powers. If energy runs out, Elliot will revive E.T., but that only happens so many times. With all that aside, the game is a reskinned haunted house. Instead of finding 3 pieces of urn, you're finding 3 pieces of a phone so E.T. can phone home and leave in the field he arrived in. What makes this more difficult is the phone pieces hidden in pits, the scientist who pulls E.T. back to the lab, and the government man who steals everything E.T. has on him if he touches you, including your Reese's Pieces. Even in the game mode that removed these hazards, I still couldn't find more than 1 piece of phone. So does E.T. deserve its reputation as one of the worst games of all time? No. However, I don't like playing it. I find it frustrating and confusing, even when I know what I meant to be doing. I don't want to play it again. Okay, I'm not making a good case for why it doesn't deserve its infamy. It's likely a case of the wrong game at the wrong time, alongside what I remember reading as a rushed development to get it out in time for the holidays. River Raid is an early shoot-'em-up, or shmup. It's fun to play too. I like how it's not only about dodging the incoming aircraft and the terrain, but also refueling. You can't just shoot willy-nilly either, because a stray bullet will blow up the fuel. I smiled when I first accidentally did that. You can accelerate or brake, and that comes in handy when the blue jets start zooming in from off-screen. It's one of those games where I could be having a great run, I make a single mistake, and then for the rest of my lives, the mistakes compound. I kept wanting to have one more game to see how far I could get. This was a delight to play. Space Invaders with a twist. The enemies scroll. Either they go off screen and wrap around horizontally, or they go off screen and wrap around vertically. Obviously, when coming at the player, it's best to avoid them until they leave the bottom of the screen to come around again. There are 2 firing modes, guided missiles as default or straight shot. Guided missiles allow the player to guide them after they've been fired, and the fire button can be held down. Straight missiles only travel straight. Megamania plays and looks well enough. I like the odd designs of the enemies, but it does feel derivative as I've already played Space Invaders. It already feels like action games are starting to homogenize on the Atari 2600 by this point. Wow, I have to retract that last sentence already. I talked about action games homogenizing on the 2600, and then I play Barnstorming. It's a game where the goal is to fly through a set number of barns nearby a plane in as quick a time as possible. There are no failure states, it's purely for the player's satisfaction of improving their times. I love the sunrise in the background as you're flying, the flocks of geese you're supposed to avoid, but if you hit them, All it does is nudge them along. I mean, it's a simplistic game, and not all that fun to play, but I appreciate how different the idea is and how much care it was given. It looks nice, it plays well, and it's not punishing at all. What a concept! Chopper Command is Defender in the Desert. I like how sensitive the controls are. It's chaotic and the difficulty ramps up fast. So far, Activision are quite good at two things: taking an existing concept, changing it slightly while adapting it to the 2600, and coming up with bizarre concepts of their own. For every Chopper Command, there's a Barnstorming. For every Megamania, there's a Pitfall. I wonder if their future efforts will fit in these camps. Well, damn! Starmaster was designed specifically for me to like it. I grew up playing the Wing Commander games. One of my plans for a future project is to play through them all again and make a video on my experiences. Starmaster is a space dogfighting sim like Wing Commander. Obviously, it's a lot earlier and a lot simpler, but I was shocked by how engaged I was. The game uses the difficulty and color TV switches to bring up a quadrant map of the galaxy. You can choose a sector and warp there, doing your best to avoid asteroids on your way. Some sectors have enemies, and some have star bases. The enemies will try to destroy you. You can shoot their projectiles. As far as I could tell, fuel and shields are using the same source, so travel and damage have to be taken into consideration. That's what the star bases are for. Dock at one, refuel, and then go search for more ships to destroy. I loved this. Even though the vastness of space in these games is an illusion, I buy in. It feels like I'm patrolling a galaxy and keeping it safe. I'm sure the illusion would wear off quickly if I dedicated time to mastering the game, but at least in completing one round, I had more fun with Starmaster than I've had with any other game so far. Don't discount the power of feeling like the game you're playing is bigger than you think it is. So, this is one of the two games I'll be covering that uses the Starpath Supercharger peripheral. It's an expansion pack for the 2600 that adds a whopping 6 kilobytes of memory. I want to make a joke about that, but at the time this was likely a game changer. Dragonstomper is a wonderful introduction to the power of this peripheral. What we have here is an early console RPG. A maniacal grin overcame me as I started exploring the landscape of the game, pressing the button to see what would happen. A menu came up with options. There was status, inventory, and the ability to fight. Not long after, I came across my first random encounter and exchanged damage with the creature. I got weapon upgrades and items off the enemies I defeated. Exploring, I found castles that could be unlocked by keys and churches to donate to and pray. There was a guard at a bridge who wanted ID, so I left to go find some. There are traps and all manner of foes. I kept winning fights and looking for solutions to problems, all while getting stronger. Then I stepped in a gigantic trap. I hadn't been healing after fights, so I was weak. It was game over. Playing Dragonstomper honestly gave me Dragon Quest vibes. I love console RPGs, and the reasons why are evident in this early example. At its best, a console RPG has the same exploration, narrative, and character I love from the adventure game genre, but you also get to fight enemies and get stronger through battle, leveling up, and either finding or buying better gear. That such a game runs at all on the 2600, even if it requires a memory expansion peripheral, is nothing short of amazing. This is the second game I've played that uses the Starpath Supercharger, and once again I was blown away by what I was seeing. A 3D maze game, in first person. The goal is to flee the maze. The door opens if you can find the right shapes and place them in the right holes. There's a patrolling creature that will kill you, and each maze has a game you can play to earn more points. I managed to get to the second maze because I am oh so very clever, and then died immediately, having to contend with flying block hazards. While playing Dragonstomper, I felt a sense of discovery as I was exploring the countryside and fighting monsters. I couldn't believe this type of game was feasible on the 2600 hardware, and I was having fun seeing how it all worked. I initially felt the same sense of awe while navigating the maze in Escape from the Mindmaster, but it didn't take me long to understand the game, and then to grow frustrated by how tedious I found playing it. Still, it might be the best looking game on the whole console, and that has to count for something, right? Is this the first Star Wars video game? Wikipedia tells me it is. This also might be the first game where an enemy changes color to show how damaged they are. I'm less confident about that, but it was a cool feature of flying the Rebel speeder around and shooting down walkers. I also loved the Star Wars music playing at the start of the game, and whenever the player gains enough points to use the Force, which grants invulnerability for a while. Shooting the walkers will change their color, but they take a hefty amount of fire to put down, and it's risky as their fire can easily blow you out of the sky. I learned that their attacks can be shot, and that made for some exciting moments. And of course, like in the movie, you can fly under their legs. The trick of the game is to damage them enough that a bomb hatch opens up, allowing a well-placed shot to blow them up. It's not as easy as it sounds, but I did yell out a yip of triumph every time I successfully landed the shot. And then things got a little stale. I was hoping to clear the level and move on to a higher difficulty, one not provided by the game's many game modes. Looking into the game afterwards, it turns out there is no win condition. The walkers either reach the rebel base or you run out of speeders. You play till you lose. I mean, it's thematically consistent with the Hoth battle in the movie, but playing an action game with no win condition quickly becomes a tiring affair. What we have here is Space Invaders with a lot more production value. Look at how the aliens appear on the screen, and there's a lot more going on with the soundscape as well. Maybe too much. The ships move and shoot fast on both sides, and each time I was destroyed, I was back in the fight immediately. It's fast, frenetic, and fun. I would much rather play this than the port of Space Invaders. When I got to the aliens that broke apart, I gasped. Eventually it got too much for me. I was overwhelmed and it was game over. There are different options for difficulty with treasure bullets and co-op multiplayer, but the core of the game is a new coat of paint and confidence on what at the time of its release is already a tried and tested genre. This is the second Magic game I've played in a row, and just like Demon Attack, the production is top-notch. I love the use of color. Atlantis is gorgeous. This is the prettiest game on the Atari 2600 I've seen so far. As for the gameplay, well, it's a nice-looking version of Air-Sea Battle, or at least the turret-shooting planes mode. One thing that makes this interesting is that the 3 turrets are controlled by the joystick. Pressing the fire button without movement fires the middle one, holding right fires the right one, and holding left, the left. Once the alien ships speed up, I found strategy going out the window, and I was spamming both the fire and directional buttons trying to get lucky. A nice looking game, but I was tired of it after my first play. More Magic games!
I'm starting to have expectations about what they'll be like. They'll look pretty, have some interesting ideas, but won't be that enjoyable to play. I mean, that's what the last two were like, and lo and behold, Cosmic Arc continues the trend. It's a neat idea. 2 stages of gameplay. Stop the Ark from being bombarded by meteors, and then go down onto a planet and save the wildlife before the ship gets bombarded. Those pesky meteors are everywhere. Instead of lives, the ship has a fuel bar. Failure will deplete fuel, but you can keep trying as long as you have fuel left. I found it easy to play, despite the speed at which the meteors appear. You really don't get more than a second or so to react, and with the 2 modes of game cycling over and over, there's never any downtime. I never had a chance to catch my breath. Honestly, I got exhausted long before I lost all my fuel and decided to quit. Interesting ideas aside, I wish the gameplay of these titles was more compelling. Dragonfire has 2 screens. The first is a platformer where you have to enter the castle by jumping and ducking the titular Dragonfire. After that, it's a race to steal all the dragon's treasure, avoiding the flame, and hiding in a basket. Once all the treasure has been collected, make a mad dash for the door, and it's time to tackle another castle. I found the jumping difficult, especially in later stages when the dragon was more aggressive. This is a simple scenario that is fun to play for a moment, but I didn't feel the need to try again once I understood the game and all my lives were gone. It's good to know that this far into the 2600 library, I can still be pleasantly surprised. Enduro is a racing game. Before the end of the day, you have to pass the number of cars at the bottom of the screen, and then keep doing that day after day after day. How many days can you last? It really is a test of endurance. I love how the scenery changes. It goes from day to sunset to evening to night and then back again. There are random weather patterns too. I found myself on icy roads and in fog. I love how by releasing the accelerator, I can coast at the same speed, allowing a re-maneuvering around a bend to pass a car that's giving me difficulty. Maybe the scenery wears off, and passing 300 cars a day doesn't require too much challenge, but at least in the short time I spent with Enduro, I was delighted that such a game is possible on the 2600 hardware. As a kid, I had Track and Field 2 on the NES. I loved some of the games, but a lot of them were hellish to play for the same reason Decathlon is hellish to play: the controls. This may be a case of having more nuance on the original controller, and the manual suggests this to be so, but competing in the 1500 meter dash was almost as exhausting as running it myself, he says with a full awareness of what a ludicrous statement that is. You run by wiggling the joystick back and forth. Every event features running, and I think the main reason is they wanted to show off their grotesque chicken leg running animation. I kid, it's pretty impressive on the hardware. It's just, the more events I played, the more unnerving it got, especially by the final event. There was little else to do other than either look at the parallax scrolling or the running animation. A lot of the events required a bit of trial and error to understand how they work, and that wasn't always feasible. I didn't manage to get on the board in pole vault. Also, because the majority of the control is going back and forth on the joystick, I switched to my keyboard instead of my Xbox One controller. It was a lot easier to tap the left and right arrow keys, and then move over to the Z key if needing to perform an action. I went through the whole decathlon, curious about what event would be next. Running is the worst, but I'm impressed by how many events the developers were able to cram in. The game is eerily silent except for the theme. You would think that there would at least be crowd noise. Ah well, if I ever play another track and field button masher again, it'll be too soon. Keystone Kapers reminded me of elevator action. Maybe because it's an early platformer and there's elevators. You're a cop in a department store. Catch the robber while avoiding obstacles and collecting all the stolen loot he's dropped. Each obstacle will take from the round's timer, and some obstacles will straight up kill you. I learned very quickly not to get in front of the crook, because then he'll run back down and the escalators only go up. After the first couple levels, it becomes a mad dash to apprehend. The game is fun and challenging, but I was getting frustrated by the increasing amount of obstacles in my way. I mean, in one level, the crook got to the roof. I can only imagine if he reaches the end of the level, he escapes. I think this one is fun for a play. It's an inventive scenario, but it's not a game I would want to become proficient at unless I received it as a present when I was a kid and I had nothing else to play until my birthday or Christmas. First off, the static that litters the screen when your tank is hit is amazing, as are all the weather effects and how they affect the way the tank moves. Robots don't need to sleep, and thus Robot Tank is relentless. Enemy after enemy after enemy, firing and moving closer, using the radar to find them and leading your shots to destroy them. During the night and in the fog and rain, hoping one of your shots gets lucky. Before I reached a game over, I defeated one squadron and reached day 3. I was getting a handle on how the game worked, but its relentless onslaught makes it a game I wouldn't want to put any more time into. You'd have to have the stamina and be truly dedicated to get through to the end. I didn't like this one. I appreciate what it's doing, but I've never been a fan of simulation. I think it's mostly because one has to study the manual or spend a lot of trial and error learning how everything works before one can enjoy the simulation itself. Now, the start of Space Shuttle is an auto mission, so I got to enjoy a flawless shuttle launch, but then I was just floating in space, only able to change the y-axis on my direction. I had a brief look through the manual to understand what was going on, became intimidated by all the buttons on the 2600 being part of the simulation, and tapped out. Maybe this is an amazing lo-fi facsimile of being an astronaut, but I did not have the patience to uncover it. Well, this is cool. A hero rescuing miners in a cave. Each level starts with a new cave, and the hero is equipped with a backpack helicopter, a heat ray, and some dynamite, blowing open walls, descending down shafts, and eradicating beasties, all to get to those that need rescuing. A neat idea and well executed. The game modes jump through the levels 5 at a time. I reached level 5 on my own, but it took me a couple tries. What's going against the game's favor is the amount of trial and error needed to succeed. Which shaft is safe? What's the layout in case I turn off a lamp? How do I avoid what I can only assume are blocks of lava? These questions can only be answered by dying and then coming back with the knowledge to avoid the trap in the future. Despite that, I enjoyed my time with H.E.R.O. Well, this was a disappointment.
In some ways, Pitfall 2 is better designed than its predecessor. There is no death anymore. The red crosses are checkpoints, and if you reach a new one, it's a new starting zone if Harry hits anything. The problem is how difficult the game is. For example, avoiding the most minuscule brush of a flying condor's arc, or having the good luck that it will be flying high when you make a dash for the hole in the ground so that you won't hit it as you fall down. On the start screen, there is what looks to be a cat. Reading the manual told me that Harry has to find his niece and cat, so I can only assume that's the cat. Also, the music is a nice touch, but I bet that wears out its welcome pretty quickly. I was excited to play Pitfall 2 to see what advancements were made between the two games, but it doesn't really look that much better graphically aside from some new animations. It feels like one step forward, 2 steps back. And here we have the final game of this escapade, Secret Quest. This is a late entry for the console. It came out in 1989. What I see this as is the Atari 2600 take on The Legend of Zelda, which came out a few years prior. It's a top-down labyrinth, and there's a sword. Clearing a room of enemies will either spawn some energy or oxygen for the ever-depleting bars of our hero. The effect which spawns the enemies is pretty neat, and I like the music. I found it way too easy to be hit while trying to defeat the teeth or potato men, and eventually I lost the use of my sword. I didn't know what the symbols meant, and in a second run-through, I came across a room with a countdown timer that killed me. Looking at the manual, I found out that every attack depletes energy. Oh goody. And each level, you need to find the code to activate the self-destruct mechanism. There's also other weapons, but they take more energy to use. Oh goody. This game feels like it needs a lot of patience and dedication to persevere. I have neither to give it, and so I end my discussion of Secret Quest alongside ending my look through the Atari 2600 library. If you've made it this far, congratulations. I'm now done covering all the games for this project, 43 in all. To rank them would be tedious, but I did continue my personal rankings after I played each one. It showed me how ridiculous ranking is. It was often more difficult to place a game in a growing list than it was to write about. It feels like so many of these placements are arbitrary. Would I rather be playing this game or that game? What about this? Do I think what this game represents is better than the act of playing this other game? There were too many factors, and none of them ultimately mattered. Still, I ranked each game, and I said I would share the results with you, but to avoid being tedious myself, I will only count down the top 15 out of everything I played. I'll post the whole list afterwards if you have any further interest. At 15, Missile Command. What the game represents juxtaposed with how enjoyable it is to play keeps it in my thoughts. Number 14, Swordquest Earthworld. Not the most enjoyable game to actually play, but trying to represent the tale told through a comic book in game mechanics at this point in time is worth something. Number 13, Escape from the Mindmaster. Using the extra memory of a peripheral to create a first-person maze game is remarkable. Number 12, H.E.R.O. I love the concept and all the tools the hero has at their disposal to rescue the miners. Number 11, Dragonfire. This reminds me of Dragon's Lair on the NES, but it's actually fun to play. Number 10, Dragonstomper. I love console RPGs, and getting to play one in an early form was the pleasantest surprise of the whole project. Number 9, Haunted House. An early horror game whose difficulty options allowed me to enjoy searching this surprisingly atmospheric house of ghosts and beasties. Number 8, Adventure. One of the first actions in the game is to pick up a sword and slay a dragon. Enough said. Number 7, Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back. The concept of shooting down AT-AT walkers combined with the futility of the endeavor made this a memorable experience. Number 6, Demon Attack. I played a couple of Space Invaders clones, and this was the best of them, with its enemy variety and the way they entered the screen. Number 5, Pac-Man. Even if this version doesn't look or play the best, it's still Pac-Man, and I appreciated the lower difficulty setting that allowed me to race around the maze. Number 4, Yars' Revenge. Fascinating to look at and enjoyable to play. Number 3, Enduro. Something about the shifting day and weather patterns elevated what was already a fun racing game. Number 2, River Raid. A shoot 'em up where you need to collect fuel and yet you can shoot the fuel tanks had me wanting to see how much further I could get with each attempt. And the number 1 ranked game out of everything I played for the Atari 2600 is, drumroll please, Starmaster! What can I say? It reminded me of the Wing Commander games. It's a space shooter with a map of the galaxy where the player has to refuel and repair at space stations that can be destroyed by the hostile enemy forces the player is gallivanting around the galaxy trying to exterminate. Out of all the games, Starmaster struck the best balance between the illusion it was trying to convey and being an enjoyable gaming experience. Now, if you're interested in the rankings of the other games, here's the full list.
So what did I learn? First of all, this project contained a lot of pleasant surprises. Genres I love like RPGs and space shooters had representation in early forms. I found out that the games partly responsible for the video game crash of 1983 aren't actually that bad. I mean, they're not great, but they're not that bad. Not that bad is maybe the phrasing that most comes to mind when thinking back on my time with the Atari. A lot of games were novel, but I didn't want to dedicate more than 5 to 10 minutes to any of them. That's likely because the late 70s and early 80s is so long ago that even the best of the Atari can't compete with what the medium has had to offer since then. For example, while I had such fond memories of playing Pitfall as a kid, it didn't hold up. And that makes me wonder what other cherished games from my childhood and adolescence would not hold up to current Dave's scrutiny. Having said that, the problem now is this silly idea has inspired me. I'd love to do this with other consoles I grew up with. The issue is that from this point on, the games industry becomes a lot more saturated. My thought is to move on to the NES next, but I don't think the way I chose the games for this project was ideal, or if it will work for more popular consoles. I don't want to end up playing most of a console's entire library, but if I have to do that, then it can't be just one video. What I'm saying is that I plan to do more of these types of videos in the future. It's just going to take me a little while to work out what form that takes and then to execute the idea. So, did you learn anything after watching this? Maybe you've never played the Atari or have only heard rumors about certain titles. Maybe you grew up with the console and this is a trip down memory lane. Whether you jumped around the video, were interested in the rankings, or watched the whole thing, I thank you for your time and I hope it was entertaining and informative. Finally, if you have any Atari 2600 games you'd recommend that I didn't cover, reactions to the video, or any ideas about how you'd like to see this concept evolve, please let me know in the comments. Until next time, stay safe, enjoy your gaming, and I hope you're all having a wonderful day.